This week's episode is a two-part episode, so stay tuned next week for the rest of Kevin's story. Today's guest is Kevin Skolnik. He's a product manager at Capital One, former Peace Corp, and we both worked together at the Millennium Challenge Corporation for, it was 2 or 3 years, Kevin, and it's been a while, so thank you for joining me.
Thanks. It's my great pleasure to be here, Jeremy. I appreciate it.
So for those who have never met you or had a chance to have a conversation with you and learn more about you, talk about your background, where you're from, who you are, and what you do.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again for having me. This is a lot of fun. And I've got a kind of a funny story. So I'm originally from just outside of Washington, D.C., kind of a D.C. suburban kid on the Maryland side, and grew up in the area. And more or less was from pretty early on really interested in a few things, mostly music. I love music. I make music. I am interested in music and helping people. I think that was a big part of my kind of identity and maybe even professional aspiration as a younger person. And so that led me on a pretty wild journey professionally, and I have kind of zigged and zagged my way through my career. Um, so uh, I, you know, I started, well, shall I tell you the full story, kind of beginning to end?
Sure, why not? It would be very interesting.
Uh, well, so I was a kid who, and I still am to a certain extent, somebody who's just interested in everything. I just want to know more, go deeper on pretty much any topic, and I am excited about, I don't know, almost anything. And so that meant that in high school, I was really, really excited about anything that was really interesting to me. So I took a lot of chemistry and I took a lot of music, and I took a lot of as many advanced placement classes as I kind of could, but not in kind of a way that was building towards some sort of, clear kind of college major, career. I had no idea, and I mean no idea what I wanted to do after high school. It was the expectation in my family that you go to college because college was the opportunity to go ask and answer a bunch of those questions. So I kind of said, all right, well, what am I really interested in? Well, I love music, but I'm not sure I want to be a quote unquote musician because I had definitely studied my, musical heroes, and most of them were, well, dead or and not from old age, and or divorced 5 times and estranged from their children. And it had definitely been my kind of also my aspiration to have a family and maybe a meaningful kind of romantic relationship. So I pretty quickly said, I love this, but I'm not sure I'm willing to live in a van for the next 10 years while I kind of make it. And maybe, just maybe, I could kind of break through at some point. I wasn't frankly sure I had the talent to do that or the drive. So, but did really want to be involved in music. So I said, you know what? I'll do music production. I love it. I love the technology and kind of the technique around it. So I found a university that had uh, like a major in music production. Actually, I found a few, and I chose one. But looking back, I made a really, really wise decision, which was I chose a liberal arts college. And the two reasons that was wise are one, even if I knew exactly what I wanted to do, the liberal arts education brings in different kind of exposure to lots of different areas. So, psychology and what they call humanities. So, kind of history through art, culture, and literature, world religions, political science, economics, sociology, social science. Um, and so, whether I kind of realized it or not, I was getting kind of an education in lots of different areas. while I was still focused on music. The second reason is a liberal arts college is a little bit more kind of um, flexible in your coursework and your major. And so if I wanted to change my mind, I probably could, as opposed to like a 4-year engineering degree. And if at some point you change your mind, you kind of have to start over on another track. And so I graduated after 4 years with a degree not in music production. After about a year and a half, I kind of figured out that, well, you don't need to go to college to be a producer, a music producer. I think there are probably some really good programs out there. And the one at UNC Asheville, which is where I did undergrad, they had an excellent program. I think it's still very active and actually pretty well known. But I was learning pretty quickly that this was one of those fields where, yeah, you could absolutely study it, but having a major in this or a degree in this wasn't going to make you the best producer out there. Your ability to produce was going to make you a great producer, and the way to get to that point was experience. And so I could have easily spent all my time, as so many have done, sweeping the floors at a great music studio, and eventually kind of somebody would give me a chance to kind of learn kind of by observing or get my hands dirty or whatever. So yeah, I pivoted um, and realized that, while I was passionate about music, what I really wanted to do was probably help people. That was the thing, the kind of theme that just kept coming back to me. And so I got to do a few things. One of them was I got to study abroad, and that was probably one of the most special opportunities in undergrad that I got. I studied in Ghana in West Africa for a semester for about 5 or 6 months, and I immediately turned around and spent the next semester in Cuba for like 5 or 6 months. And that year of living abroad, studying abroad, like living in West Africa in a dorm in the capital city of Ghana in Accra, and traveling quite a bit, and then coming home for a very cold month after living in the tropics, and it was December in the DC area, and then going to Cuba, which was a place that we really don't get much visibility into or information, especially some years ago here in the U.S. Was just absolutely eye-opening and incredibly inspiring. So I came back and finished my undergraduate and had kind of pieced together a degree in something that reads like ethics and social institutions, but really I was focused on having pieced together a degree focused around conflict resolution, because at the end of the day, I was seeing, these massive conflicts that are so disruptive and kind of at the source of so much human suffering. And I wanted to figure out, how can I do something about that? Now, this was still pretty early on. There were college kind of courses and maybe majors focused on this area, but this was also, funny enough, this is also a field that was fairly nascent at the time, and there weren't many jobs per se in the field, especially there was no real pipeline from undergraduate to the professional world. The idea of an entry-level conflict resolution specialist or something like that, mediator, there were a few out there, but certainly not in the kind of international domain. Maybe working for your local county, or something through the courts, perhaps. But even then, I'm not sure I really understood that. So there's plenty more to this story, but
well, I would say my son's fiance has a very similar degree.
Mm-hmm.
That she went and got her bachelor's and then her master's, and
Mm-hmm.
she's struggling to find that entry level position still.
Yeah, I think I have a lot. Kind of looking back, I have a lot to say. It's a skill set that has been incredibly valuable. In everything that I have done, it has led to success. But the skill set itself doesn't necessarily create value in the traditional sense that we think about value, aka dollars.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is one of the biggest struggles in the quote unquote helping people arena. Is we want to help people and we build skills that help people, but those skills aren't necessarily valued in the workforce. I'm not saying I like that. I think it's upside down. I think we could talk about teachers and teacher salaries and, you name it. So, so many fields that are, legal experts, lawyers, and certain folks doing, certain kinds of banking, and, they're paid, 10, 20, 50, 100 times what a teacher might make.
Right.
And I think a lot of us would probably say, well, if there were another way to measure value, we'd probably pay people differently. But as things stand currently, they're very important skill sets and perhaps kind of really, really important to our species, but not valued by the economy in the same way. And so I'll equate that, Jeremy, to speaking a second or a third language. So, or actually even playing a musical instrument. So you could spend, I mean, how hard is it to master a language? So I learned Spanish in school. I went and studied abroad, like I said, and then I continued, and even to this day, speak fluent or near fluent Spanish. But that's not what I would call like a tier one, top tier job skill, because there are a few people who use their incredible Spanish or other language, you name it, to create value because they translate, for example, or they do some, kind of real-time translation or something like that, or they translate important documents and whatnot. But that's actually a pretty select few. And frankly, the people who are going to do that are native speakers who also are incredibly fluent in kind of written and professional,
Right.
Versions of that language. So somebody like me who got really good at it, that was a really great skill, but it was a secondary skill. And I said learning an instrument. Imagine learning to play the guitar. I'll pick one. It's it's a wonderful thing to do, and it's really challenging, and it's also really hard, and you can spend hours and hours and hours, and you might get really good at it. But the truth is, the demand for a really good guitar player is pretty limited, and there are some fantastic guitar players out there. Eric Clapton picked up a guitar when he was 16. That was the first time he ever picked up a guitar. So there are some people out there who are just unbelievably skilled and driven. And that, if that's you, great. But if it's not you, I would call that kind of a secondary or maybe a tertiary skill. Like you may not be able to create a ton of value just by doing this thing. Now, we could get into how you could leverage these skills and abilities, or at least the kind of things that you know how to do within that skill or ability to kind of leverage that to do something great, absolutely, and get creative. But the thing itself, much as I hate to admit it, conflict resolution, that undergraduate degree, what was valuable about it was absolutely the kind of secondary skills that I acquired. But those secondary skills did not get me a job out of undergrad. It kind of did. It did lead to a thing, which led to kind of another thing, which I'm happy to talk about. But I think you have to be careful in the sense that for me, I think I did it just about right at the time. You do the best you can with the information you have and with the resources you have.
Right.
So I made some key decisions. One, I didn't go very far into debt to get that undergraduate degree. I had a little bit of support from my family, and I chose a very inexpensive state school, not in my home state, but it didn't end up mattering because my folks were able to at least cover the difference, which was pretty small. And I worked all through undergrad, and I kept my costs as low as possible, and I was able to pay off my undergraduate costs in, I don't know, 2 years after undergrad because I was pretty focused on it. And I was able to borrow money pretty cheaply, all things considered. That was decision number one. But the other thing that did end up helping me in the long term was as I said, I'm somebody who's interested in everything. And that's actually one of my kind of top value producing abilities. I'm able to lead with that because when you're able to get interested and learn about anything, that means you can do, well, kind of anything. I saw fast forward to now, which I'll fill in the middle, but I do product management. Product management, the best product managers, they outlearn. That's what they do because they don't know the answer. They have to go figure it out. In
Right.
fact, they don't even really know what the answers are. They have to figure out what the problems are.
Mm.
And to understand a problem, you really have to go deep on something that may be really, really kind of new or strange to you. So I currently work in the credit card business. Well, when we worked together at MCC, let me tell you how much I knew about the credit card business. I knew that I had a credit card and I knew the kind of basic ways in which a credit card works. That's it. And so over the last almost 4 years, I've had to just go really deep on some topics in that world. And I can do that because I developed this or I didn't just create, but I really invested in and cultivated this just kind of interest in anything and everything. And I just kind of put aside any sort of judgment and just said, I'm just going to ask a lot of questions and imagine what it's like to be on the other side of this and ask a lot of kind of probing questions and learn. And just whatever I find out, I will add to my kind of knowledge base and, move forward to create something new. So it really helped to have a background in, I did a lot of philosophy in undergraduate. I love big questions. I love asking those kind of, huge universal questions and seeing what different people and different think of what their experiences are. And again, nobody necessarily will hire you because you love to think about big questions and what did, I don't know, what did Immanuel Kant think about this particular question. But learning about, I don't know, something like the categorical imperative or some framework that he kind of came up with to think about these kinds of questions, well, that's incredibly powerful. That's learning that you can kind of bring along with you. So it didn't mean to be, but it is kind of a passionate argument in favor of the liberal arts because when you think you don't really need to know anything about contemporary art or who knows, the history of Japan or something like that, it turns out that these human stories, are incredibly not just powerful but cyclical and repetitive, and that there is a lesson, maybe many lessons within each one of these kind of stories and experiences. And for those of us that are willing to kind of stop and look at them, there's so much to be learned, and frankly, I think a lot of mistakes to be avoided if you're willing to slow down and kind of ask. I make a lot of mistakes though. Let's just
Well,
let's just
learning from mistakes is also learning, right? So that's all right. That's what we do, right? The whole learn from failure. If you don't learn from failure, then yes, then there is a problem. But if you learn from failure and don't repeat that as best as possible, then there's value there as well. So what with this interesting degree and your penchant for learning, what was that first real job out of college?
So I got a job through a friend working at an organization, a nonprofit called Seeds of Peace. And Seeds of Peace is this incredible nonprofit that essentially believes in this, what they call the lifeboat model of peace building. So essentially, one of the big barriers that kind of causes and exacerbates conflict is that people have these ideas about each other, especially kind of opposing groups. And what's funny is when you bring these people together and have them spend time together, specifically away from the kind of environment that has fostered this conflict, the the healing has already started to begin because you're able to see this person as a human first and not necessarily some sort of caricature or stereotype. So Seeds of Peace was founded by bringing several groups of teenagers from the Middle East, specifically, well, at the very beginning, Israel, Palestine, and Egypt at the time, all together to a summer camp in Maine. So picture your summer camp in Maine. Everything looks like a summer camp, including the lakefront with the dock, the canoes, the arts and crafts, shack, the cabin, and the mess hall and whatnot. Except the campers are, teenagers flown in directly from Jerusalem and Tel Aviv and the West Bank, and they're all trying to eat lunch together. Except, these are so-called mortal enemies. This is that particular conflict obviously is, let's call it, hundreds, if not thousands of years in the making. And so it was an incredible experience to work in conflict resolution. And specifically, I got to kind of not just work there, but I also got to start kind of a formal music program, because I personally have experienced the power of music and how it brings people together. And so the director at the time of the organization of the camp also had this vision that music was an opportunity to transcend language, which of course is a major barrier between people who speak Hebrew and Arabic, or in other cases, teenagers from India and Pakistan who speak maybe Hindu and Urdu, and may not necessarily all share kind of even kind of conversational English, for example. But music, on the other hand, doesn't need words, and you can kind of feel feelings and express thoughts with sound. So that was a really incredible experience, which was definitely kind of in the field. And I was just, basically in heaven and learning a ton about some of the most complicated and heartbreaking things that happen in the world, especially to children. And I could definitely tell some stories. Um, but that was not full-time all the time work. It's seasonal. It's kind of, you're trying to fundraise in the off season, and the program is incredible and the organization is incredible. But like so many nonprofit organizations, it's extremely lean. And so I think especially many of us early in our careers are just trying to have a regular paycheck and maybe have some health insurance. And I think so. At some point, I realized, okay, this is incredible. This is to a certain extent, I guess, maybe my dream job, but it wasn't necessarily totally sustainable. And I had already been making some plans, because one of the other things I had not always wanted to do, I realized that I wanted to do was serve as a Peace Corps volunteer. So that was a way for me to step kind of fully into the kind of human development, international development field. And so I stopped working at Seeds of Peace when I basically shipped out to serve in the Peace Corps. I was 24 years old. I had an undergraduate degree. I had a few years of experience doing kind of conflict resolution work and kind of pieced that together, no pun intended. And then it was time for another peace thing called Peace Corps. And so, yeah, I started, and I went to Mozambique, in southeastern continent of Africa. I had actually been originally, they told me I would be headed to Eastern Europe, and I called them up and said, I really would like to be working and trying to do anything I can to learn about and see if I can help with the HIV/AIDS pandemic. So they said, okay. So they took somebody who was, fairly fluent in English and Spanish, and they sent me to a Portuguese speaking country. That's a kind of a common joke in Peace Corps that if you speak Spanish, they'll send you to Ukraine or somewhere in Eastern Europe where you have to learn a totally new language. And that was 2 years to a little bit more than 2 years of an absolute life-changing experience, which I could just go on and on about. But it was incredibly powerful to live in a small community for just about 2 years, and really just your mission is to learn, just observe and see what's going on and use what resources and knowledge you have or can pick up to try and see if there's some opportunity for this community. And that, I mean, that might be as small as growing a garden, or learning how to, in my case, even some little things I got to do, jarring sweet potato, like mashed boiled sweet potato, which is incredibly rich in nutrients. But I lived in a community that was pretty much every year was completely flooded. And so this is a community that basically went through this feast or famine cycle every year, if not 2 years. So the idea of jarring, how could you put something in a jar and seal it so that it would last 6 months? Well, that if you had that, even if it did flood, you wouldn't have to rely on your crop that's currently in the ground in case it does flood. The line between surviving and not surviving is so thin in a community like that. So I got to do things like that, and I also got to work on a larger PEPFAR funded project, which was under the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, under the UN, and do something within the agricultural education field, which was essentially kind of testing. It was basically teaching, especially younger folks, like elementary and middle school aged children, how to grow crops, because this is a big farming community, but not just how to grow crops, but how to test and understand and improve yield of crops, because obviously the difference between growing enough for you and your family and growing enough to sell to other families,
Yep.
is again the difference between subsistence and kind of thriving and growing. So that actually was something that kicked off essentially the rest of my career to date, which was I started to understand the power of measuring. How do you know this is working? Um, what? How do people tell, especially in international development and human development? How do you know? And this is such a hard question to answer. So easy to ask, but so hard to answer, and yet lives depend on it. And further, my comment earlier about, we measure things in dollars. Well, that's extremely problematic when we're talking about a community that is really struggling to fight infant mortality. We're talking about babies that don't make it when they should. In the rest of the world, if they were born anywhere else, this would not have been a question. But in this community, we're finding that kids are not surviving childbirth, and moms aren't either. So we need to understand, what works to improve or kind of decrease infant mortality or maternal mortality. And I just got to work on a project where we were doing what they call program evaluation in the international development field. And I started to see, wow, I love data. I love metrics. I love human development and international development. And there's this whole field out there called program evaluation. Oh, this is a perfect fit for somebody like me. It's kind of all the things I really love. Now, I didn't do music, but even by that time, I had realized, oh, music is something I'm really passionate about. I'll do that till the day I die. But I don't need to make money making music. I can just play music for fun, if I want. And so, yeah, I came back kind of pretty focused on what the future might look like. Now, not as laser focused as some people when they say, like, I knew, like I said, I zigged and zagged quite a bit, because one of the downsides of being interested in anything is you can kind of go and try all sorts of things. My now wife laughed at me once when I saw a job posting for a karate instructor, and it said, "We'll train you." And I said, "Well, I could do that. I could learn that." And she said, "Well, do you know any karate?" I said, "Well, no, but I could learn." And honestly, I believe that I really could have, but that's just how open my mind was to, if you're interested in it, you can just go get it. But obviously there's a transaction cost to, going way over here and then way over here, at least in the short run. I will make the case, if there's time, that zigging and zagging has made me so much better in my current role. And that for folks that go straight through and only have kind of one lens they look through, there's so much that you might miss if you're doing the kind of job that I do. So that was Peace Corps, and I'm happy to talk about where I went from there, but I want to pause.
Yeah, so it's very interesting. So I first of all, I agree with you on the zigzag methodology of working your way through your career. And I'm not going to dive into my background, but mine is zigzagged all over the place. Completely changed careers, I think 3 times in my career. But it was like you. I love learning. I'll learn something new, or I've learned something completely. And now I'm like, I did it. What's next? Right.
Right.
Like when I worked at MCC with you, I worked in 3 completely different roles in my time at MCC. And I just go, okay, boss, you want me to do that? I'll go figure it out. Right. I love it. I love doing that sort of thing. Have you found that also led into how you chose your roles? So, you started that first one at the camp. Now you went Peace Corps, which is a big deal. A lot of people out of college who are interested in helping people, right? Peace Corps is a big option there. What was the zig after that Peace Corps experience back into, quote unquote career, right? Because Peace Corps volunteer is not a permanent thing.
Mine, yeah. So you'll find one of the themes in my career is shifting away from kind of a sector or a mission and towards a skill set and a kind of, call it a value proposition. So I started way over on the mission. Basically, only the mission mattered. I almost didn't care what I was doing. So that's going to be true at Seeds of Peace, where I was just like, sure, I'll play, I don't know, tennis with kids from the Middle East. Sure, yeah, I just want to be here doing this because this is the most important thing to me. And serving in the Peace Corps, sure, I'll go anywhere in the world that you tell me to go, and I'll pretty much do anything you tell me to do if it means, helping. So I could have stayed in, I suppose, Southern Africa if I had wanted, but I was focused on coming back to the States. But continuing this journey, I basically said, well, I loved that. I don't think I want to stay abroad for most of my career, but I'd love to kind of do something like this, but in the US, and maybe get paid for it. That would be kind of cool, because volunteering is great, but you don't obviously make any money. And, money is a thing that powers some other things in our lives, I suppose. So I came back and I got a job as a project manager building playgrounds in underserved communities. And this is at an organization called Kaboom. They're based in DC, yet another incredible nonprofit that basically partners with communities across the United States and generally speaking, corporate funders. At the time, the Home Depot was a huge funder, for example, and I know there are lots of others now since then. But essentially, as a project manager, you travel all over the country basically almost every week, probably 3 out of 4 weeks, and lead community-led playground builds. So it's an all-in-one day playground build, and it's incredibly powerful and transformative to essentially show up, and have a big dirt patch or a big something like that, and then a few days later, after some prep, and the whole community comes out, and in one day stands up like a big, beautiful, colorful, creative playground. And by the way, it's kind of created and inspired by the local kids and the local community. And that was an incredible experience. And it was really kind of my next kind of shift towards skills, still very, very mission driven. But I started to realize, like, oh, okay, so what are the things that that I can do that actually provide value. So I can, I can run a shovel or mix concrete, but that anybody can do that. Not anybody, but many people can do this. So what are the things that I can do where I can add value? Well, as a project manager, you're talking about, classic project management skills that I was learning, schedule and tasks and allocation of resources and kind of concurrent or overlapping projects and budgeting, and you're leading groups of 250 to 500 volunteers in a day, so you're out in front of a huge group and representing, I even did press about the builds with local media. These are all skills that I was able to develop, but it definitely, of course, was mission driven and frankly not especially sustainable to travel 75% for a long time. At least I think some people manage to do it longer than others, but I didn't last a very, very long time because it pretty much means I had no social life. I'm sure I wanted to be kind of out, and I was a younger guy still and wanted to be meeting people and dating maybe, and that was pretty tough when you're on the road and essentially you're rich in tiny shampoo bottles from hotels, and that's pretty much it. You're working 16-hour days, traveling late at night, getting home exhausted and turning around doing it again. I mean, it was an extremely rich experience, but the next job I took after that was an interesting pivot. So I basically tried one more time to just go all in on passion and only passion. And you won't see this on my resume. Typically, I omit this because people don't get it. But I wanted to try one more time to play music professionally.
Okay.
Because I had it in the back of my mind that I just, I spent all this time doing this. Am I sure that's not the thing for me? Because I'd never really just gone for it. I had played it on the side in groups and whatnot, but never just said, I'm burning the boats, I'm just doing this. And I did. And I tell you what, I learned really, really quickly from that experience. And I wouldn't call that a failure in the sense that it went okay, actually. I did put together an album and I put something out and I supported it. And I don't know, it was fairly well received. But I learned really, really quickly that my art and money were really, really not going to go together. I think some people can piece it together. Like I said, some people are willing to sleep in a van. If you read something like Dave Grohl's autobiography or whatever his storytelling book, like, this is what it takes to make it. Is you're 19, you quit school. Now, some people don't do exactly that, but this is a pretty common story because if you want something like that badly, you do only that for years and years. And that wasn't me, but it was worth a shot because I learned that about myself. And funny enough, that's when I met my now wife. And that was part of what kind of reoriented me. And I realized, like, oh, right. Remember that thing I was thinking about having a family one day? Like, oh, okay, I better figure something out here. And so eventually I did go and kind of take the next career step that's more or less in line with this other kind of theme. And I took a job with a large nonprofit called FHI 360, doing a program officer job, which is kind of a program support. And it was incredibly mission driven, and I got a lot of exposure to some really kind of, it was supporting the Office of Head Start, so early education, which is really a really easy mission to fall in love with. Obviously children are adorable, but supporting, again, underserved children in certain communities that I don't know what others believe, but I believe that every child should indeed have access to a great education and give them a shot at doing whatever they, doing their best. Right. And so that's exactly what Head Start is focused on. So that was a kind of a program support role, but it was a kind of a platform on which I was able to go and launch kind of what is now the kind of the current phase of my career. So I did that, but at the same time, I also went and entered grad school. So I had finally figured out what I wanted to do. So I had talked about program evaluation, that fire that started way back in the Peace Corps. I knew that I wanted to understand how to measure success, and especially in human development. And I had finally figured out, oh, well, this is graduate work. This is learning statistical analysis and understanding, well, yeah, how do we measure success in even in economics? Like, how does that work?
Right.
Again, I knew the broad strokes from my undergraduate education in micro and macroeconomics, and like I said, kind of psychology and sociology and a lot of the things that play into that, but not in any great kind of depth. So I got myself I got myself a scholarship to a graduate program at American University, and I still laugh about it because when they offered me a full ride at American University, I had this feeling of, did they make a mistake and give this to the wrong person? Because I had good grades, I guess, in undergraduate, but not stunning. And I'm certainly a passionate kind of student, and I kind of was very involved and engaged, but not your kind of classic valedictorian, head and shoulders above everybody else. I did have a very compelling, I think, story to tell, which is what I like to believe made the difference. But regardless, I worked full time at FHI 360, and I was a full time graduate student at American University. Um, and for fun, I got engaged and trained for a marathon, my first marathon. And by the end of grad school, we were expecting our first child. So it was an incredibly intense period of time.